And I'm really honored that you are going to be our guest speaker today for this distinguished series webinar. And you're most welcome. And I leave it to Dr. Atika, the TIC, to give a formal introduction, but then it's a privilege for Bharati College. You're most welcome on this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I know this formal introduction and everything, our department is very well aware, but that introduction for participants so that they also realize to what an eminent personality they are being exposed to. Thank you very much, Dr. Atika. Not kindly take it up.
A very good morning to everyone. And so finally, after months of planning and of derailing, we are finally, getting to have Professor Majumdar, talk and, present his latest research. And we've had the privilege of having him speak to us earlier as well. And we know how, interesting his talks can be, how he is not just a literature person, but he's into all different sorts of arts, whether it's painting, it's poetry, and of course, that's what brings the extra edge to, Professor Majumdar's talk, those visuals that we get to be treated with. And I hope everybody is going to enjoy this session. And so while we all know that, Professor Majumdar is a veritable, Renaissance man with, so many with so much to boast of. I'm going to just introduce him to our students so that they know how much, the kind of privilege they are having to get such a person to speak to them. So Professor Rupendra Majumdar, academic, poet and artist, has taught in the faculties of English in Delhi University and Suffolk University, Boston. He has thrice been a recipient of the Fulbright Fellowship in Yale and Suffolk Universities, USA. His book, Central Man, The Paradox of Heroism in Modern American Drama, was published by Pierre Lang, 2003. He has contributed to Columbia Encyclopedia of Modern Drama, 2007, and articles and poems to several anthologies and journals in India and abroad. His exclusive interview with Arthur Miller appeared in the Arthur Miller Journal, November 2016. His essay, Before the Empty Bench, The Equivocal Motive of Trial in Arthur Miller's Works, features in Arthur Miller for the 21st Century, New York, Palgrave Macmillan, 2020. He has authored 5 volumes of poetry in English since 1971, and the latest one, Coda, is expected to come out in the middle of this year, 2020.
It's already come out.
So thank you once again, sir.
Atika, the book is already out.
The book is already out.
The book is already out.
Already out.
Yes, yes. Please congratulate sir on our behalf, and we'll have a book reading where sir can come in person.
Yes, so we'll have another author's talk on this now.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so thank you once again for being with us, and over to you now, Professor Majumdar.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Atika. That's for a very gracious introduction. I have already circulated some introductory notes. I hope that has gone around, because as you know, the paper has been based on a talk I gave at a conference in Taiwan. It was on the topic of cultures of travel. All right, here is the brochure of this. This was a conference that I attended last year, and to a certain extent, it is based on that. But of course, I've extended it from that short paper. As you know, this is the last year was the 700th anniversary of Dante's death, who died in 1321. So it has been, Dante has been at the center of a lot of news and activity, research activity. In the notes that I gave you earlier on, as you know, that Dante was from Florence, as Marco Polo was from Venice, and that in this poem, he combines both Christian and pre-Christian ideas and iconography. Okay, and on the surface, it is a plain kind of a travelogue, almost that it is the travel of Dante through hell, purgatory, and heaven. But at deeper levels, it is representing allegorically the soul's journey towards God. And the Divine Comedy is, we can consider it to be in the tradition of Saint Augustine's Confessions, all right, which is the first Western Christian autobiography, all right. And both of these texts are masterpieces of literature. In the case of Marco Polo, we see this journey being recorded by another person, a friend of his, in jail. And so it's a kind of a version of what he had in his own mind and in his own experience. And it contributes to the genre of travel. So I will not go more into that. I'll start with my paper, okay? And I will, if there are any questions at the end, please be free to ask, okay? Okay, so when T.S. Eliot spoke about Dante possessing a visual imagination, quote, visual imagination, in the context of the poetically conceptualized post-mortem world of the Divine Comedy, he meant visual in an age when men still saw visions, quote unquote, when men still saw visions. This is in his essay on Dante, T.S. Eliot's essay on Dante. These were visions of freedom, honor, salvation in spiritual domains, as well as those of unconquered temporal frontiers. In that sense, Dante's medieval vision, like that of his contemporary Marco Polo's, initiated a complex imagery of the potential of new civilizations that people had neither seen nor come to terms with. At the threshold of the Renaissance in Italy, two strange narratives in poetry and prose, distinguished from literary antecedents except for their epic spirit, emerged as a surprise on the European scenario. They shared a common teleology of marvelous journeys across uncharted lands and frontiers and paved a new and imaginative literary pathway in Europe. Vikram, figure 2 is there, right? Figure 2, referring to figure 2, the one on the left is the Divine Comedy, and on the right is Il Milione, which is the Italian name of Marco Polo's The Travels. And Milione was a family name of the Polos, all right? So Il Milione, the person from Milione family. Marco Polo's Il Milione or The Travels, so they have been printed, they have been written in 1300 and 1320, so very small gap. And these two books, in the absence of the printing press, were in the form of manuscripts that would be constantly resurrected in varied European languages, richly illustrated in miniature and other styles of painting by a range of artists who would absorb classical, medieval, and Byzantine influences. Both these Italian accounts of arduous journeys at allegorical and geographical levels would foster visual and poetical perspectives relating to the potential of alien horizons. Both journeys in different ways were involved with the prospective yet conflicting dissemination of Christianity and its underlying tensions that the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation would embody in the years ahead. I hope someday I'll come to your college again and I'll give a talk on this, on the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. No, right now I won't go into that. Dante's and Polo's descriptions of the adventures of their respective protagonists, who are also their own simulated selves, but only partially autobiographical, are replete with a complex range of imagery and action across uncharted terrain. Both of them speak in the first person about the journeys they partake in. These descriptions endorse an ekphrastic conceptualization of events that align foreign with traditional value systems. Dante's narrative is contextualized in a life of constant disruption and exile that made him a rebel and a political outcast till the end of his days. Marco's narrative acquires the extra impetus of the voice and imagination of his prison cellmate, Rustichello da Pisa, who was his companion in the cell that he was serving a term in prison in Genoa, who transcribed his story in a different kind of a language and form of the romantic tradition of that time. Dante's poetry contains the potential images of a visible and tactile world that artists could translate into their own idiom, as Sandro Botticelli of the 15th century and others did in the 15th century, 100 years after these people. Like Dante, Botticelli a century later, also a Florentine, synchronized classical and Christian iconography, treating the images of Venus and Madonna with the same seriousness and beauty in a very unapologetic way. Okay, he did not explain too much why he was synthesizing the pre-Christian and the Christian, all right, the classical and the Christian iconography. So this has been treated by a lot of critics. Eric Auerbach observes that Dante, quote, single-handedly established the expressive possibilities and the landscape of all poetry to come. And he did so virtually out of thin air, unquote. The earliest dated image of the Commedia comes from Florence itself in 1337, 16 years after Dante's death. It has been observed that these early illustrations featured highly collaborative work that became fully engaged in the wide range of subjects to illustrate within the epic text of the Divine Comedy. For instance, Satan and the Inferno have always been in focus for artists of all ages right up to our own. In the Renaissance, the artists Botticelli, Orcagna, and Zuccari were prominent illustrators of the poem. In the 19th century, we have William Blake, Scaramuzza, Gustavo Dore in the 19th century, and Salvador Dali in the 20th. They provided artistic shape to Dante's poetic vision. The style of the illustrations have been influenced by various artistic trends and influences. Vikram, number 3, please. Scaramuzza's depiction of figure 3, Scaramuzza's depiction of Dante being carried in the talons of a gigantic eagle, as you can see on the right-hand side. This is in the Scaramuzza's painting, right? Recalls the medieval Eastern, the Middle Eastern folklore of the enormous rock bird, ROC, rock bird, that Sinbad the sailor took advantage of in escaping from an island. You can see Sinbad on the left-hand side illustration, all right? This is what the 12th century explorer, Benjamin of Tudela, observes in his book, Travels in the Middle Ages. Vikram, figure 4, please. That griffons, all right, and you can see the griffons or griffins were as familiar to the Arab imagination as a giant rock was. Marco, please go back to 3 for a minute, Vikram, thank you. Marco mentions the name Rukh, R-U-K-H, inferring from the monstrous size that could not be anything but griffons. So I'll come back to this later on in the paper, the significance of the griffon symbol in these writers. The massive size of the rook in the illustration of the travels shows the bird having talons powerful enough to lift elephants, as you can see in the middle picture, which is from the illustrations of Marco Polo's travels, right? Where the bird having talons powerful enough to lift elephants before killing them on the rocks below. And they are thus smashed to pulp, observes Marco. Quote, the griffon bird perches on the carcass and feeds at its ease, right, unquote. Okay, so we'll go back to this later on. So you can move on to figure 4 now, Vikram. So art in Middle Times, especially in the miniature form, connected not only the recordings of daily life patterns and the poised emblems of individual and society, but also grew out of the human necessity of mobility between cities, countries, and continents. As new frontiers were discovered around the world, maritime progress augmented the extent of hitherto limited travel enterprise. And it was in medieval times that the notion of travel crossed boundaries of mere speculation and imagination, with adventurers like Benjamin of Tudela, you can see his book on the right-hand side, Marco Polo, John Mandeville, Odorok the monk, the almost mythical figure of Prester John, often referred to by Polo in his narrative, and later on, 100 years later, Christopher Columbus, that linked the arbitrary distances between fact and fantasy in the terms of art and cartography recorded upon vellum, parchment, wood, plaster, and mosaic. And of course, on the written or printed page, as you see in this figure, Shine Legacy in the Medieval Invention of Travel, the book on the left-hand side, written in 2017, describes this trend as being both natural practice and philosophical abstraction between 1200 and 1500. Travel in medieval times opened up new parameters for literature and art. People realized the role that literacy and aesthetics played in the formation of new prestigious modes of mobility. During the lifetime of both Dante and Marco Polo, art and literature were also contextualized in the 2 centuries of the Crusades, which is roughly between 1096 and 1291. All right, in the medieval period, the Crusades is a very big historical context. All right, and this had its influence leading beyond Eastern Europe to the Holy Land. Crusades had led beyond the east of Europe and the Holy Land. Imperialism and religion and responses to them combined to form a significant context for aesthetic and literary expression. The Ninth Crusade, led by King Edward I, ended in 1271. The year his ally, Gregory X, was elected Pope. And the Polos, the Polo family, the 3 Polos who were to travel to China, including the young Marco, who was 17 years old, and for the first time was proceeding to China. They proceeded to China, Vikram figure 5. The event of launching the journey of the young lad, his father and uncle in 1271, is portrayed ceremonially in an exquisite miniature on the left-hand side. As you can see, the miniature in the text itself of the manuscript. And on the right, there's another miniature, of them leaving the city. The entire city seems to be present for the farewell, while the appointed ship on the left-hand side waits at the docks for the trio who would return home after 20 years and place Venice on the map of the world with the stories of their travels. The 2, number 6, please. Yes. The 2 elder Polos had remitted a letter to Pope Gregory X from Emperor Kublai Khan. Right. So you can see the 2 things on the right-hand side is where Emperor Kublai Khan had written to the Pope and vice versa. The Pope had also written to Kublai Khan. Okay, as you can see on the left-hand side. All right. So the Polos had remitted a letter to Gregory X from Emperor Kublai Khan, who had requested the Pope to send him 100 missionaries and some oil from the sacred lamp of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. There was indeed the latent potential of a Christian-Mongol alignment for the thrust of a 10th crusade, which never took place, against the Muslim powers. And both Gregory X and Kublai Khan, with the Polos as initial ambassadors both ways, were nurturing the idea of a political coup to reclaim Jerusalem. Pope Gregory was able to send a little oil from the Holy Lamp, which could reach the court of Kublai. But the 2 Franciscan friars sanctioned for the trip faltered and returned to Italy. The Polos went on. Unfortunately, both plans of a 10th crusade and the idea of an extensive Christian interaction between the Catholic Church and China came to naught because of the sudden death of Gregory X in 1276, which was 5 years after the Polos had left Venice on their journey to China. They had gone in 1271, and in 1276, Pope Gregory dies. So it scuttles all the plans they had of a deeper relationship between China and Italy or Europe. Following in the wake of classical and Byzantine art of the declining Roman Empire, the art of the Crusades under the Christian banner ushered in 2 artistic periods in Europe, the Romanesque and the Gothic. The influence of Byzantine art in different forms, basically anti-naturalistic in character and in favor of a symbolic approach, continued in Southeastern Europe through the 13th and 14th centuries. The subject matter of monumental Byzantine art was basically religious. Hello?
So please
I
continue.
request
Okay.
you to keep them
All right.
muted.
Okay. The subject matter of monumental Byzantine art was basically religious and imperial, like the portraits of the later Byzantine empires. Vikram, 7, please. Like the portraits of the later Byzantine emperors in the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, converted into a mosque after the fall of Constantinople, which is now known as Istanbul, in 1453. The fall of Istanbul of Constantinople took place, and here you see a mosaic in the Hagia Sophia, all right, which is concentrating on the Christian element, all right, the iconic Christian focus. In Byzantine art, as you see in this painting, or rather mosaic, two genres were often combined. Firstly, that of the iconic, which portrayed figures like Christ and Mary and the saints, objects of veneration in Orthodox churches. They were meant to manifest the unique presence of the icon in question by means of a likeness. All right, it is not naturally portraying that figure, but it is a likeness. Secondly, we find the genre of illumination of manuscripts, as you have seen earlier, in Byzantine art, with scribes of the churches illustrating the scriptures or psalms and devotional or theological texts. Both manuscripts of Marco Polo's Il Milione and Dante's Divine Commedia could be contextualized in these two trends of iconographic and illuminating art of manuscripts in the medieval age that would have to wait till the mid-15th century to benefit more expansively from the discovery of the Gutenberg printing press, which took place in 1440. All right. Though most of these manuscripts were religious in nature, there were antecedents of heroic and secular ones as well. For example, the Alexander Romance, which Polo mentions in his book, right, regarding the conquest of Alexander the Great. All right. And for the likes of Il Milione to be aligned and analyzed. So we should see the travels, Marco Polo's travels, also in the context of these secular, both Dante's and Marco Polo's, in these secular epics as well, okay, romances as well. For the likes of Il Milione to be aligned and analyzed like Marco Polo's travels, these texts followed the same principle of combining fact and fiction that the Romance writer Rustichello da Pisa also adopted in transcribing his high French version of Polo's adventures in 1298. In the secular narrative of Marco Polo's travels, Kublai Khan as subject replaces the customary religious iconic figure of Byzantine ecclesiastical manuscripts. Figure 8, please, Vikram. Kublai Khan is not a Christ, but in Marco's eyes, he's the great Khan, sovereign of a vast tract of Oriental land. The illustrations follow the same trend of representational art in which the finer physical attributes of the subject is less important than what he signifies as lord and master of a large civilization. And in the miniatures in which he is depicted in court or in a hunting spree, he looks more like a medieval and venerable French king with a long white beard than a Chinese monarch with slanting eyes and a drooping black mustaches. Similarly, figure 9, we see in another miniature, the 4 chief Chinese wives of Kublai. Vikram, number 9. Thank you. In this, we see the 4 chief Chinese wives of Kublai Khan accompanying their lord at dinner, and they resemble more the noble ladies of an European court than the consorts of his exotic palace. So this is the problem that we see in the illustrations, and I shall talk about it later. In the case of Dante's Commedia, we discover less the miniature art of the manuscript than the trend which marked the new generation painter, Giotto. All right, he was the famous painter of that time, Giotto. No, we have not come to that yet. Giotto, I in fact avoided details of Giotto, who lived between 1267 and 1337. And there was a shift from the Byzantine influence of his predecessor, Cimabue, 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 all right, and going into the far more naturalistic and lyrical parameters of Sandro Botticelli, all right, who is going to come in the 15th century, all right, of the early Renaissance art, before approaching the domain of Dante's problematic spiritual journey from Inferno to Paradiso. Just as Dante's epic poem was not merely about heaven and hell and the recuperation of lost souls, but a complex semi-autobiographical record of contemporary political tensions in Italy. Marco Polo's travels was also not just a simple record of his 20-year-old journey through China, but, quote, a description of the world, a mixture of a travel report, legend, hearsay, and practical information, unquote. Okay. So my paper here will tentatively examine the relative significance of the illustrations in the two contemporary medieval Italian texts of the 14th century, 13th and 14th century, as they evolved. Okay. So Dante's The Divine Comedy and Marco Polo's Il Milione were written a few years of each other. The former, composed between 1308 to 1320, Dante died in 1321, was originally, that is, Divine Comedy was originally published in 1472. The latter, that is, Il Milione, transcribed initially in 1298 in jail and translated in manuscript form in Paris in 1410, was first printed in Nuremberg in 1477, late 15th century, long after he had died. Both offer accounts of fantastic journeys, temporal and metaphysical, that critically feature their respective authors as their central protagonists. This is very interesting, all right, where the form of the confessional novel or fiction, the journey as fiction gets formed, the foundations get formed. For an extensive period of almost 20 years, both men lived far outside their original homes. Marco, as a young traveler, earnestly serving the Mongol government, and Dante living a double life as poetical icon and rebel away from his Florence, dying far away in the eastern coastal city of Ravenna. However, their books and journeys are seen as radically different by Sante Matteo, who considers the geographical, non-metaphysical nature of Marco's journey in comparison to Dante's to represent, quote, a horizontal, centrifugal propulsion in Italian history and culture, unquote. And Dante's journey as, quote, a vertical one, leading to a transcendent realm, unquote. As one moving through history, leading contemporary Italy to Greco-Roman civilization and to the Hebraic Christian tradition, mixture of the two. Polo's story was subsequently complemented in art in French medieval and semi-Byzantine miniature styles. The travels formally charts a history, both real and imaginary, along the Silk Route to the exotic Oriental domain of Kublai Khan's Cathay. Paintings in the miniature style, in the Livre des Merveilles, that was a French name, which means the Book of Marvels, all right, featuring the experiences and narratives of several adventurers like Marco Polo in medieval times, deal partly with the journey of the Polos from Venice to Cathay and back between the years 1271 to 1293. The cities en route, the persona of Khan and his royal activities in and out of the court, like meeting dignitaries, hunting and war. Then you have exotic scenes of animals like dragons and griffons, mutated human beings encountered. Miniatures show the Polos touching Hormuz on the Persian Gulf, where they admire beautiful stallions. A nomad camp in Central Asia, Mount Ararat with Noah's Ark, Vikram, figure 10, please. Mount on the left-hand side, you can see the Noah's Ark over here. It's a conceptual painting and a conceptual reference. Mount Ararat with Noah's Ark after the deluge, perched ostensibly on its top in the Greater Armenia that Marco describes in Book 1. Quote, in the heart of Greater Armenia is a very high mountain shaped like a cube on which Noah's Ark is said to have rested, unquote. Polo describes scenes of cities like Hangzhou, Beijing, a port on the Yellow River, Chiandu, Bukhara, Uzbekistan, Kerala in South India, with its ebony dark inhabitants harvesting pepper. It is surprising that South India with its it is surprising that Marco's description of certain people of South Asia since the medieval age revealed the colonial bias of racism on account of skin color and physiognomy. The miniatures on the right-hand side, the two miniatures you see on the right, he describes the folk of Ceylon as well as the Indian regions of Nicobar and Andaman Islands and of Kerala as dog-headed. And that was exactly how it was literally reflected in the illustrations in the manuscript. Their bodies are human except for the heads, which along with the teeth and eyes are like that of, quote, big mastiffs, unquote. Indeed, if the illustrations, in the illustrations, their distorted black canine-like features recall the demons in Dante's Inferno punishing sinners. It is indeed surprising that the accuracy of Marco's observations on many of the traditions, norms, and cultural patterns of the people of the Asian continent does not correspond with his description of the animal-like physiognomy of certain people. Maybe he did not mean the description to be as literally dog-like as much of the illustrations did. Both Marco and the French artists in question, in different degrees, together create an exotic and alien world that reveals anthropological attitudes of condescension and colonial superiority regarding subjects that inhabit alien corners of the earth. But one must also remember that these descriptions were twice transposed, first from Marco to his cellmate Rustichello, then on to the numerous French artists' interpretations. This kind of arbitrary graphic mutation did not happen in the case of Dante's Divine Comedy, in which the artist had a one-to-one equation with the text's concern and would only exercise artistic license over demonic allegorical beings in the convention of a biblical iconography. Oh God. Please mute yourself. Biblical iconography of good and evil. Hello.
Please mute yourself.
Oh my. So the convention of biblical iconography of good and evil. Many of Marco's descriptions embodied vivid
Sir, you have muted yourself by mistake. Please unmute, sir.
Oh, am I okay?
Yes, sir.
Sorry, I'm very sorry.
No, sir, it's
so
perfectly all right.
I hope it happened just now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So many of Marco's descriptions embody vivid verbal images and patterns. So he himself is a kind of artist, all right, looking at things visually. Fragments and stories, even though there are no corresponding graphic illustrations which directly relate to them in the manuscript. He mentions Saint Thomas, who was martyred in 72 AD in Mylapore, India. The custom of euthanasia practiced by Jain Munis in old age even today, which allows men and women to kill themselves, quote, out of respect and devotion to some particular idol, unquote. The ancient heritage of Devdasis, or maidens who are dancers married to gods in the South of India. The queen of Metupalli, who ruled her people with, quote, a high standard of justice and equity, never marrying again after her beloved husband dies. About yogis who live healthily even up to 150 years. The entire story of the Buddha or Sakyamuni renunciating from worldly possessions after directly witnessing old age, sickness, and death. Marco gives a detailed visual account of the native process of collecting diamonds from a very dangerous mountainous region in the south, near Hyderabad, swarming with serpents via the inadvertent agency of eagles. All these accounts are like miniature documentaries that appear before our eyes much more vividly than most of the stiff and stereotyped depictions by artists in the Book of Marvels. The artist consciously did not dare venture into the business of depicting or interpreting images of the Devdasis or the Buddha or even the mythical and ambiguous figure of Prester John. And quite often there is a very thin line of distinction between the literal and the metaphorical or allegorical in the vicarious medieval or early Renaissance art. There are a number of illustrations, figure 11 please, which touch upon Christian imagery. Attributes and direct or indirect influence within the 20-year parameters of Marco's travels. One illustration shows Marco hearing the story about baby Jesus and the adoration of the kings from the Orient, who had brought him special gifts. Another depicts men in the Middle East collecting frankincense from trees. Kublai's request of the Polos to fetch him the holy oil from Jerusalem is fulfilled. Niccolo and Maffeo delivering letters between Kublai and Pope Gregory X. We see the Polos presenting a book to John the Fearless, the original Christian commissioner of the manuscript of Marco Polo's travels. Marco's contemporary Italian traveler, Dominican monk Ricoldo, began his journey in 1288. This is a contemporary traveler, right, who was also quite well known in his time. Okay, Ricoldo, and just like Odoric was also a missionary, So many of these monks traveled all over Asia. Traveling through many parts of Asia before Ricoldo returned to Baghdad during the reign of King Arghun. Right now, he features for a short time here, who, on being widowed, had requested Kublai Khan, his grand uncle, to send him a bride from China. The latter reciprocated by sending the princess Kokochin by sea. Yeah, the next slide, please. Number 12. Yeah. Escorted by the Polos in 1291. This was the miraculous excuse the Polos needed to return home. Otherwise, they would have probably never come back, as they said. On their 2-year return trip by sea, view depicts a Mongol fleet struck by storm. Okay. Meanwhile, Arghun died, and Kokochin was married to his son instead. That's a slightly different version of the story. As mentioned earlier, expectations of seeing fabulous illustrations of the great Mongol Kublai Khan and his court are in vain. Most naturalist pictures of him or his royal activities are mainly by Chinese artists. In the Book of Marvels, most miniatures of the great Kublai are drawn by proxy thousands of miles away by medieval European, usually French artists, whose efforts are very colorful, but wooden and conceptual, right? And ironically, these illustrators enforce an unique act of artistic colonization. This is a term maybe I have coined, artistic colonization, by depicting the lineaments of Mongols on the terms of Caucasian models or Western models, equating the levels of appearance and dress. Hence, when we see letters being exchanged between Pope Gregory X and Kublai Khan, through the intercession of the Polos, it appears to take place visually within a recognizable European setting, in contradiction of the actual journey undertaken across thousands of miles in the East. In short, the illustrations, except for the catchy subtitles, are primarily Eurocentric. So next part of the paper, dealing more with Dante, all right? This will be number 14, 15. We'll come to 14, 15. I'll take another few minutes to conclude this section, and then we'll have a break after that. About 4 or 5 pages over here, all right? We'll have a break after that. Okay, like Marco's setting of Venice, Dante is also shown frequently in relation to his beloved Florence. Please show number 14. Right. Florence is behind him on the right-hand side, okay? And on the left, we have both Inferno and Purgatorio. And so Florence is implied to be a kind of paradiso, all right, in a conceptual way. That's what Dante is turning to. There's a famous painting by Domenico di Michelino. Like Marco's setting of Venice, Dante is also shown frequently in relation to his beloved Florence, from where, ironically, he would be banished forever. Domenico di Michelino's famous painting, which is not a miniature, of Dante and the Three Kingdoms, 1465, portrays Inferno and Purgatorio in traditional Christian style, but Paradiso is evoked through the view of a resplendent Florence on the right. However, the advent of Dante's journey, as William Blake shows us in figure 16, next one, 15, 16, Vikram. Yeah, 16. This is the description of that painting, earlier painting, and this is number 16. If you want, we can go back a little bit. We can go back to 15. Yeah, the writing. Yeah. So some points here. Okay. The gates of hell with the eternal flame are in the bottom left corner, and written above the entrance is the famous line, "Abandon all hope. The 9 circles of hell are waiting below for the procession of naked sinners." And then we see Purgatory in the middle, reveals a long winding road around the mountain. Behind him, the center of the painting, and finally the meeting of the Archangel Gabriel in his armor, waving his sword in the air and weighing the souls at the gates of paradise, Garden of Eden. So if you turn to number 14 again, Yeah, you see that this archangel at the top, and this is the mountain of purgatory, and this is Inferno with Satan sitting at the bottom, waiting for the sinners. All right, please turn to 16 again. Yeah, where Blake's painting, referring to the beginning of his journey, of Dante's journey, where he says, I quote here from 3 lines, midway life's journey, I was made aware that I had strayed into a dark forest and the right path appeared not anywhere, unquote. Okay. Vasari's lives, Giorgio Vasari was the chronicler of the artist, as you know, in the 16th century, 1550. Recapitulates the emergence of a new consciousness of the artist, unquote, quote unquote, a new consciousness of the artist in medieval Italy. One that fosters a cult evoked through museums, exhibitions, illustrated manuscripts, the media, in short, okay, in order to celebrate the idea of the artist in modernity and empowering him as a hero who would replace the Homeric or Virgilian hero of epic literature. As Paul Barlowski, Bikram, number 17, as Paul Barlowski observes in Dante and the Modern Cult of the Artist, right, that around 1300 emerges in Tuscany, Italy, a new consciousness of the artist. That and the modern idea of the artist as a heroic individual with poetic imagination originates in Dante's Divine Comedy and establishes a legacy which unifies poetry and art heroically as a discourse, leading to the debates of Thomas Carlyle, Ruskin, Pater, Emerson, Kierkegaard, and Sartre. Vasari was the first to use the term Renaissance in art criticism. During the Renaissance, Michelangelo chose to model himself on Dante, affirming that no greater, quote, no greater man was born. Dante is the precursor of the poet-artist as a hero on trial in modernity, manifesting his vision of life through the potential of his journey. It constitutes a vision that is enhanced across centuries through the imagination of painters. Dante's life and work form the basis of an aesthetic tradition that envisages novels like that of Irving Stone's The Agony and the Ecstasy, 1961, and Lust for Life, 1934. Biographies of painters like Michelangelo and Van Gogh, respectively, that conceptualize an unique art and theater of cruelty in our times. Both these artists, Michelangelo and Van Gogh, as you know, were artists inspired by Dante, whose bizarre inferno and its tortured denizens enduring punishment for their sins, quote, has provided modern and contemporary illustrators with some of their most poignant, provocative, visionary imagery, unquote. This was by Cosolo. In Purgatory 11, figure 18, Vikram, the poet describes the Florentine artist Giotto. So this is a painting by a fresco by Giotto, as surpassing in talent his precursor Cimabue, okay, considered as a leading Italian painter of his time. Giotto, who had met Dante and drawn his portrait, here you see Dante's portrait over here, right? Giotto had drawn his portrait, is often referred to as the father of the Renaissance. Giotto is notable for, quote, infusing his paintings with a naturalism and dimensionality that moved beyond the Byzantine style popular in Italy at that time, unquote. He focuses on emotion and the natural representation of the human figure, a trend that would be discherished by Botticelli after him. Vasari's lives, emulating Dante, combines the journeys of the artist and the pilgrims towards the perfection of God, realizing on the way the limitations of art. This is very important because this is the note on which Dante's Divine Comedy concludes. So the limitations of art in symbolizing divine perfection, right? So art cannot ultimately illustrate divinity, right? So in his great poetic work relating autobiography, scripture, and fiction, Dante is supposed to have combined two central facts: the epiphany of his love, Beatrice was his distant love, right? He was never married to her, and his lifelong exile from Florence. These were the 2 points that he emulated and he embodied. He also combines in his Christian allegory the essence of the Old and New Testaments within the model of Virgil's classical Aeneid. So Aeneid was a framework, okay, as a quest for the ultimate. Dante highlights the teleological quest of the artist as creator in Purgatory. Figure 19, please. If I could paint the way the pitiless eyes was put to sleep, I would draw as a painter paints from a model, unquote. All right. He says this in Purgatory Canto 32. So the Divine Comedy is seen as intensely ocular, O-C-U-L-A-R, all right, by a critic, being about what the eye can see in visual experience. A sustained, complex, and rich description of events as phenomena seen. Dante, as pilgrim and protagonist, moves through space and, quote, participates in the history of perspective that life's journeys provide. Vasari observes that Filippo Brunelleschi, an artist, Florentine artist and sculptor, invented a modern pictorial perspective and a founding father of Renaissance architecture, made studies of the Divine Comedy. At the start, this influence was in the dimension of illuminated manuscripts of the poem, and later in fresco painting, Giotto's The Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel is evidence of this fact of the emulation of Dante's perspective in the art of the time. During the Renaissance, it was Sandro Botticelli, figure 20 please. It was Sandro Botticelli who, having presented the masterpieces of these two paintings you see here, Primavera and the Birth of Venice, Birth of Venus, right, in 1478 and 1485, the first prominent serial artist of Dante's epic poem. Figure 21. In 1882, the Berlin Prince and Darwin Museum acquired his spectacular series of drawings illustrating scenes from the Divine Comedy. Botticelli created around 92 drawings in 1485 with meticulous care and imagination, using silver point on parchment, and completed the drawings in pen and ink, of which only 4 are entirely colored. As you can see, these are 2 of the 4, all right? And you see the pair, Virgil and Dante. Dante is always in red and Virgil is in blue. So these you can see are 4 times repeated. Same over here, all right? You can see blue and red, the pairs moving around. And this was a kind of almost like emulating the movie, the cinema, all right? Where the movement of the figures imply the movement of the entire vision, all right? So Botticelli created around and the Vatican Library has these paintings, all right? These illustrations for Inferno, and Raphael's painting, The School of Athens, is said to have been inspired by Dante's Inferno, because both works seem to emulate the greatness of classical antiquity. The Commedia reaches, another 2 pages before I stop, the Commedia reaches a critical turning point at the end of Purgatorio, all right? Cantos 29 to 33. When Dante's impending meeting with Beatrice, figure 22 please, Vikram, will be at the expense of the further companionship with and guidance by Virgil, all right? So Virgil will be replaced by Beatrice. This is Beatrice who is unveiling herself, all right? And here is Dante standing in front of her, very meek and acknowledging the charges that she makes about his own sinful past. Dante's impending meeting with Beatrice will be at the expense of his further companionship with and guidance by Virgil, who will vanish at this point, at the end of the at Purgatorio. And it will signify Dante's willing confession of his past sins, exposed by her, and willingness to turn a new leaf with her as guide henceforth. As in the drawing by Botticelli, Beatrice confronts him willingly and unveils her face as he looks up at her. Quote, the veil she had from her head let fall, is from Purgatorio, Canto 30. Overcome by emotions at this point of vulnerability and penitence, Dante collapses in a faint. The 4 dancing cardinal virtues lead him up to the Griffon, figure 23. Yeah. Which lead him up to the Griffon. This is the Griffon here, all right? Sorry, here. This is the Griffon, all right? Half eagle, half lion, all right? Symbol of the duality of Christ, as Dante himself writes in the preface, okay? Where Beatrice is standing and implores her to acknowledge her faithful servant with a smile, which she does. In Paradiso, cantos 18 to 20, Dante is guided by Beatrice towards the cherished beatific vision, initially in the form of the Eagle of Justice. 24, slide 24, please. Composed of myriad souls. This is a very abstract painting where you see hundreds of skulls or heads on the eagle, all right? It's forming the eagle, the shape of the eagle, okay? Composed of myriad souls. An early Italian miniature by Giovanni di Grazia, all right, shows the couple floating against a deep blue background, conversing with the eagle's more than 50 faces. Dante qualifies the hybrid image of the Griffon in Purgatorio 30, Canto 30, into the most symbolic figure of the great eagle of justice in Paradiso, an icon that the poet and Beatrice confront together. This eagle, visually comprising the collective appearance of many souls, portrayed by Renaissance and later artists, recalls the giant Rook, RUKH, of folklore, as illustrations indicate, its phenomenal body and wings composed of innumerable symbolic skulls or heads, while signifying unity, as Dante points out in the preface in Canto 19. He says, Dante writes, the quote, the symbolic eagle speaks with one voice about divine justice, unquote. A painting by Scaramuzza of Dante in a sublime state, figure 25, the next one, eyes closed, being carried by the giant eagle as Rook is supposed to have carried Sinbad. Okay. However, it was during the Romantic and pre-Raphaelite movement in Europe that illustrations of Dante's Inferno reached a peak. Please turn to the next one, 26. Initiated by Blake, William Blake, Delacroix, this is a painting by Delacroix, Fuseli, Rodin, the sculptor, and above all, Gustave Doré. I'll just show you a few because there's no time, right? Inferno is said to have provided the most, quote, the most substance for artists drawn to depicting scenes of passion, horror, and fantasy, unquote, by Kostler. These included certain figures, themes, and scenes. Like, for instance, the adulterous passion of the lovers Paolo and Francesca. I've taken one theme, that is the lovers Paolo and Francesca, and how this has been treated by artists, okay, all over, you know, and including in literature by people like Chaucer and so on. So, so here these include certain figures, themes, and scenes like the adulterous passion of Paolo and Francesca. The next slide, 27A. On his sculpture Gates of Hell, there's sculptures by Rodin, all right. On his sculpture Gates of Hell, figure 27A, this one, the first one, where you see the thinker, and also over here, there's somewhere the kiss, which is actually Paolo and Francesca, all right, kissing before they are sent to Inferno, all right, into the punishment of Inferno. So lovers who are the carnal sinners that Dante speaks about in Inferno, Canto 5. Their story inspired Blake to visualize his painting, The Circle of the Lustful, all right, figure 28, all right, yeah. The Circle of the Lustful, which is prominent within the set of his 102 watercolor Dante illustrations in 1824 for, quote, the intensity of its emotions and the energy of design, unquote. The lovers are shown caught in a terrific whirlpool. You see this whirlpool, all right, with Virgil standing on the right bank. This is Virgil, all right, and standing on the right bank, looking down on Dante, who's fainted, all right, on Dante, who has apparently fainted after he has heard Francesca's fate. Blake, as an artist, all right, who is also interpreting Dante, all right, qualifies Dante's condemnation of the lovers, okay, with his own more gracious view of salvation, showing in his illustration a flame of emotion. This is the flame of emotion, all right, a flame of emotion rising from his prostrate body, all right. He's responsible as a poet, all right, of evoking, of endorsing their love, all right, from his prostrate body and fondly enclosing the lovers. Gustave Doré's illustration shows, I don't have an illustration for that, the souls of Paolo and Francesca, as in Blake, floating in a whirlwind. So in the Romantic period, there are many artists, all right, like the pre-Raphaelite artists, who also depicted Dante's acknowledgement of the need for punishment after sinning, all right. They gave it a romantic touch to it, okay, like Goethe also does in Faust. Augustus Rodin's, this 27B, please go back to 27. Yeah, 27A and B, right? So this is by Auguste Rodin, the great sculptor of the 19th century, right? Emulating the Greco-Roman style, okay? So Auguste Rodin's individual sculpture, the kiss. So this kiss has been, the sculpture has been taken out of the Gates of Hell, okay, of his own artwork of Gates of Hell, has profoundly sublimated the lovers from the murky setting of the Gates of Hell, where they were first positioned, and shown them in a delicate last embrace that freezes on the desired kiss before Inferno claims them. He has literally plucked them with his artistic license out of the Christian portal of damnation as he has also done with the thinker in figure 29. If you look at figure 29, Vikram, yeah. Figure 29, the thinker, the journey of the lovers, he has also brought it out from the gates of hell. The journey of the lovers from the figures of hell, of guilt in Inferno, to the open air of Rodin's ecstatic romantic art reflects the kind of unapologetic reunion of transgressing souls that Shakespeare portrayed in The Passion of Antony and Cleopatra, or Goethe did in the reconciliation of a hedonistic Faust with Gretchen. That Keatsian moment of parturian desire in Paolo and Francisca's united lips, frozen in time, serves as an act of transcendence. It also serves as an antithesis to the conception of the journey as a continuous impulse and itinerary of self-discovery, by revealing an expression of love that remains rooted in one universal truth and place through poetry and art. The philosophical conflicts of all these ideas and emotions in Dante's Inferno are contemplated by Rodin's The Thinker. So this thinker, as you will see in the earlier illustration, if you look at two illustrations, The Gates of Hell, if you, Vikram, just turn to Gates of Hell for a minute. Before that. Yeah, here is the thinker, right? You see the thinker over here. And then you turn to 29. Yeah, so he has come outside and you can see replicas of this in many parts of America and Europe, right? All right. So Rodin's The Thinker is placed on the top of the top center of the portals of the gates of hell that the sculptor created in the context of Dante's Inferno, okay? So this is what we see him as a contemplative figure in art, all right, corresponding with poetry and with epic poetry. All right. Okay, I'll stop here for 5-10 minutes. Okay, I'll give you a break. Atika?
Yes, sir.
It's okay, 5 or 10 minutes. We'll wait.
Yes, so we'll wait for you. You can take a break of 10 minutes, sir.
All right, right. Nandini, is it going okay? And bestial enough to be enslaved or looked down upon. Medieval explorers contributed, consciously or otherwise, in word and image, to such a skewed perspective of the extended world through their narratives of actual or fictional journeys. The Catalan Atlas was of great use to Christopher Columbus in his travels in 1492. It was almost 150 years after these people. The map included 30 names of China and all the Asian and East European toponyms, Toponyms, which means names of places, toponyms, mentioned by Marco Polo. For the first time, this atlas uniquely contextualizes travel literature of the medieval age, like that of Marco Polo and of other missionaries who explored the Far East. In relation to Dante's Divine Comedy, the popular medieval and later Renaissance idea of cartography takes on a metaphorical and dramatic significance. For such maps portray, as in the case of Polo's journey, the passage through domains in a parturient New World equation. Very tense, right? It's struggling to say something, to make a statement. The only reason for illustrating and mapping Dante's Commedia was that it was contextualized in Christian theology. Even though it moved beyond the Bible in its depictions of the afterlife and in incorporating autobiography and contemporary politics. So combining autobiography and politics, which we see in many of the modern novels we read today. Botticelli's figure 30, this illustration, exquisite map of hell in 1480s. This was done in the 1480s. Embodying Dante's vision of Inferno is a great work of art that is now in the Vatican Library in Rome. This was drawn on vellum that is on the skin. And it represents the gory details from the Commedia as an inverted cone structured vertically in 9 decreasing circles downwards, where sinners atone for their various degrees of sin. Like the translations of the poem into many languages, European languages, Botticelli's map of hell is a faithful visual translation of the descriptions by the poet. The chart of hell, or the Mappa Mundi of hell, the chart of hell, observes Deborah Parker, one critic, quote, has long been lauded as one of the most compelling visual representations, a panoptic display of the decent. Somebody's talking. Hello, please mute yourself. Hello. The chart of hell observes Deborah Parker, quote, has long been lauded as one of the most compelling visual representations, a panoptic display of the descent made by the protagonists Dante and Virgil through the abysmal valley of pain, unquote. Literal geographical maps have a way of becoming more popular than metaphorical ones in the context of an age that relished the art of cartography and, quote, the Renaissance obsession with proportions and measurement, unquote. The Divine Comedy apparently heralded a craze for, quote, infernal cartography, infernal meaning pertaining to hell, right? Infernal cartography, unquote. Or the mapping of the hell that Dante had created from his imagination, okay? And going very precociously, going beyond the Bible, right? To create, like William Blake also did, okay? And many others, Salvador Dali has done in our time, okay? Where recreating, reinterpreting the original texts, you know, which were touching on theological issues, okay? But also the conflicts within theological issues. Okay, so the respective maps pertaining to Dante's and Marco Polo's worlds of discovery serve to complement the visions of their respective authors regarding the unique courses of their journeys. Okay, so now I'll come to the symbol of the griffon, okay, from 31 to 37, right? From 31 to 37, we'll have a look very quickly at the symbol of the griffon. This just fell to my eyes, you know, and I felt that this was something which, very strangely enough, very interestingly enough, features in both Marco Polo and Dante. All right. And what is the griffon? Who is the griffon? All right. And what does it accord to Christian theology and or whatever? So we see Dante using this symbol very, very strongly. Okay. Anyway, lastly, in the comparison of textual illustrations of the literal and metaphorical journeys of these two famous contemporary Italian adventurers of the 13th century, one more common image, besides the Mappa Mundi, rises on their horizon, signifying the mystery of the new liberating worlds that they both solicited in their quests. This is the powerful image of the griffon or griffin from figure 31 to 37, which will go through that, which subsumes both Occidental and Oriental values of mythology over millennia, alive in the folk tales of Sinbad as the fearful rook, and concluding with Lewis Carroll's comic rendering of the ever sleepy griffon in Alice in Wonderland. Vikram, could you please go through 31 to 37 and come back to 32? So this is the griffon over here. This is the griffon in Pisa on top of the cathedral of Pisa. This is, yeah, next. Here is the griffon over here attacking animals and elephants. All right. Now this is and this is by Gustave Doré. His illustrations of the griffon over here and over here. And the next one is Alice in Wonderland, the griffon in Alice in Wonderland over here and over here. Very comic griffon, all right, with Alice over here. Okay, please come back to 32, all right. And this is the powerful image of the griffon, which subsumes both Occidental and Oriental values of mythology over millennia. Alive in the folk tales of Sinbad, and as I said, leading up to Alice in Wonderland. It may be a coincidence that both Dante and Marco refer in different degrees to this mythological creature, but the reference, symbolic or otherwise, does fundamentally project an urge of the authors for the sublime, the ethereal, and the immortal that the respective narratives, Il Milione, and especially the Divine Commedia, manifest. Unlike Marco Polo's exotic but incidental reference to the griffon that we have seen in that picture of the griffon lifting the elephant, in the travels and its singular illustration in the travels, in Dante's epic and Botticelli's exquisite silver point drawings, right? It's really exquisite. He has not colored these drawings, but he has done it with pen and ink, silver point on leather, vellum, right? The same mythical creature takes on a far more important and central position as a sacred symbol. Both uses of the image reflect a visual motif that is embedded in a facet of global mythology covering millennia. It is in Purgatorio 29 that Soggiorno Dante looks up, okay, and he sees this procession coming, all right, with the griffon pulling a carriage, and in that Beatrice is sitting in the carriage, okay. This will be their first meeting, okay, in the Divine Comedy, okay. Dante meeting Beatrice, and who will lead him to Paradiso. All right. So a mystical procession advancing towards him, and at the center of its coach is a coach drawn by a griffon and carrying a veiled lady. All right, as you have seen in 33, number 33, number 33. Next one, yeah, this is the veiled lady. All right, and this is the griffon. This is the chariot. I suppose this is something called the chariot, and so on. And these are the other spirits. So, namely, the poet's ideal love, Beatrice. After chastising the poet's sinful past, she will lead him to his final destination, paradise. The triumphal card of the church, writes Dante. The triumphal card of the church, writes Dante in his preface to this canto, all right, and in Canto 29, all right, preface to Canto 29, all right, is drawn by the griffon, who, he says, represents the twofold nature of Christ, all right, unquote, okay. So the griffon has progressed in Dante's hands from a mythical dragon-like beast to a religious symbol that mediates in the final act of unification of the two main protagonists of the poem. T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday, right, echoes the concluding scenes of the Divine Comedy when he asks whether the veiled lady would pray for those who offended her. Let me see if I can find this passage, that the veiled lady would pray for those who offended her and are terrified and cannot surrender, okay, reiterating the image of Beatrice before she forgives Dante and vanishes. It is not surprising when we find Ezra Pound in his tribute to T.S. Eliot acknowledging that the latter was a true Dantesque voice, the Dantescan voice in the modern age. Ezra Pound says this of Eliot in Ash Wednesday and other poems. I'll just read out some lines from T.S. Eliot's Ash Wednesday, all right, to see how dependent he was and how aligned he was with Dante, and particularly Dante's vision, okay, of salvation, of redemption, okay, through the process of confession and punishment, all right, as he portrays in the Divine Comedy, okay, and how he brings it out in, and we see the picture of Beatrice coming out. I'll quote from Ash Wednesday, all right. He speaks of the veiled sister, all right. Will the veiled sister pray for those who walk in darkness, who chose thee and oppose thee, those who are torn on the horn between the season and season, time and time, between hour and hour, word and word, power and power, those who wait in darkness? Will the veiled sister pray for children at the gate, who will not go away and cannot pray? Pray for those who chose and oppose. O my people, what have I done unto thee? Will the veiled sister between the slender yew trees pray for those who offend her and are terrified and cannot surrender, and affirm before the world and deny between the rocks in the last desert, before the last blue rocks, the desert in the garden in the desert, of drought, spitting from the mouth the withered apple seed, O my people. Right? So these are Eliot's words, and you can see Beatrice appearing in Eliot's Ash Wednesday, just as she appears in Purgatorio, okay, in Dante's Divine Comedy, right? That is a person who intervenes, who mediates for a sinner who is in love with her, all right? But love cannot go just alone, right? It has to go along with other considerations, okay? And there has to be a rounded consideration. So he humanizes this whole idea of redemption, okay, that is achieved here. So this last portion here, okay, so Marco Polo's world is on a very different visual plane compared to that of Dante's, even though they belong to the same time, place, and culture, and share a prime impulse of self-discovery. What is strangely similar is the existential texts of their lives, as expressed in their magnum opuses, in a paradoxical epiphany and vanishing of the self beyond the domains of narrative art and poetry. It is a world that either hints at poetical transcendence above Florentine politics, or a total obliteration of the ego and identity in Venetian commerce of the 13th century, right? Going far beyond their own age, okay? It is ironic that both Dante and Marco Polo, two of the most eminent medieval icons of the Italian and perhaps world history for their poetical and geographical achievements, were totally marginalized, neglected, and indeed forgotten during and beyond their lifetimes. As we know, Dante as well as Botticelli, they were recognized in the pre-Raphaelite age in the 19th century, right? They were forgotten for a long time. Anyway, Marco Polo's travels was given shape indirectly through the resources of a Romance writer, Rustichello di Pisa, and finishes abruptly while covering Tartar wars, in which Marco hardly features. He disappears. He disappears from his text, right? After having said so much, after having revealed so much. In both cases, Dante as well as Marco Polo, the illustrations of their books move from the colorful settings of pre-Renaissance Byzantine Italy to a point of nullity or evanescence, often dubious evanescence. The last image of the protagonist in Dante's Paradiso in Canto 30 and 31, the last, each, by the way, I think I've told you, or I may not have told you, that there are 3 parts to Divine Comedy. Each of them have 33 cantos, right? And all told, they're about almost 14,000, a little more than 14,000 lines, all right? So the last image of the protagonist, Dante's Canto 31, 30 to 31. Vikram, could you come to figure 38? Yeah, this is one of the concluding illustrations of Botticelli about Dante and Beatrice vanishing into a river of light, right? Which is in Canto 30 to 31 in Paradiso. So into a river of incandescence. And then in figure 39, Vikram, yeah, where there's one radiant effluence, which is called the Celestial Rose of Paradise, all right, illustrated by Gustave Doré. He's one of the most important illustrators of the Divine Comedy, all right? And as you know, he's a very famous illustrator of the 19th century who illustrated Cervantes also, Don Quixote, okay? I have a different paper on that, which I might share with you someday, all right? Okay, so this river of this radiant effluence, a celestial rose of paradise, illustrated by Gustave Doré, and in intimation of transcendence. And here Dante says Beatrice has disappeared, all right? And Marco faces complete social obscurity, of course, in his own text, in his marginalized homecoming, and his equally unknown last resting place of burial in an unmarked grave in the church of Saint Lorenzo. Figure 40, please. Right? Figure 40. Yeah. This is the resting place of Marco Polo, okay, where he was not welcome in his city of Florence, where he was not, Marco faces complete social obscurity in his marginalized homecoming and his equally unknown last resting place of burial in an unmarked grave in Church of Saint Lorenzo in Venice, all right? And the tomb and the, yeah, this happens also with Virgil, all right? Virgil had also disappeared in the end of the Purgatorio. He also vanishes, and everyone sort of vanishes, all right? So the tomb of Dante in Ravenna, which is far from Florence, his native city, all right? He died there in Ravenna because he was not welcome in his own city, all right? And in Ravenna, okay? during his, and ironically, his exquisite Renaissance illustrator, Florentine Botticelli, shares the same fate of dying an old and forgotten man and lying in an unmarked grave. All these three people that we know of, they have all died, they're all dead in unmarked. No, but Dante is supposed to be in a formal grave, but his bones are also not sure, the people are not sure whether they are his bones or not. There are no more images left to project for good or ill that could be seen as rising from the precious narratives or historical context. The pair's respective profiles vanish in the luminescence of the fabulous worlds they created in their books. And I see this as a kind of paradox, okay? From a heightened external imagery to a heightened inner imagery, all right, inner light. So, however, both books of the journeys discussed here individually endorse the complementary images of speculative and real life and raise the human imagination through literature and art across 7 centuries to the idea that there are bigger, more beautiful and challenging worlds to discover and believe in beyond the narrow confines of hegemonic power. Okay, I conclude my paper, but I'll go on to 2 more slides, all right, as a tail piece, all right, 41 and 42. 41. I'm referring to 2 movies, modern movies, which have been made. Come back to 41 first. 41, all right, which have been made on the basis of this particular map of Inferno by Botticelli. All right. So the first one, figure 41, is the name of an Italian-German documentary film directed by Ralph Loop in 2016, which examines the map of hell of Botticelli and the motivation of creating it in relation to Botticelli's earlier 2 famous paintings, The Primavera and The Birth of Venus. Right? As you know, that Kenneth Clark, the great film critic and art critic, he has written a lot about The Birth of Venus, okay, and how it sort of transcends the medieval restrictions of art, okay, and moves beyond it into the Renaissance in a literal way. So the film was shot on location in the Vatican and so on. So this is one film that you may be interested in which we see Botticelli and Dante's conceptualization of Inferno, okay, 700 years after it has been done, and we are experiencing it. And lastly, in figure 42, we move into popular literature and popular cinema, right? In figure 42, where we see Dan Brown's novel, right, part of his trilogy, all right, 3rd sequel to the Da Vinci Code in 2006. He writes Inferno, okay, in the 2009, all right, which is centered on Dante's Inferno and Botticelli's Chart of Hell, right, of 1485. And it stars Tom Hanks, Felicity Jones, and our own Irfan Khan, okay, and made a huge profit of $20 million. It was a huge hit, okay. So as I said, from this, the ancient 700-year-old texts that we are dealing with, medieval times, I have quoted T.S. Eliot as well, all right, I've showed, and these films, I've referred to these films to show how significant it is in our time, okay, this entire exploration, this entire journey into an unknown domain, okay, which promises a lot for the human imagination and for human faith. All right, I think I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's been an absolutely amazing session, and we have really, been we've been taken through so much, and now we know how Dante, and Dante especially more than Marco Polo, how phenomenal his Divine Comedy is, and how even today we'll have artistic recreations stemming back those 700 years. So it's been very amazing. Thank you for this ocular treat.
Thank you very much.
With so many paintings.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Half the
And
world,
half the work you can
half what I was going to show you.
was.
Yeah. And discussing other
But,
of Islam.
oh, it's half of what you wanted to show.
All right, there are many other things that I wanted to discuss, but maybe another time. All right.
Okay. Maybe another time. But yes, you did bring in mention of the Crusades and of the political turmoil and the Pope and all of that, and yes, also the fact that we tend to have a more of a very monolithic understanding of the medieval ages.
Absolutely.
And I hope the students have understood how the medieval vision was very complex, and Dante was one of the first to amalgamate classical and Christian imagery and iconography.
Yes.
Much before the Renaissance. It happened in the Renaissance.
Yes.
And then also the ekphrastic outpour that such works led to, right from Botticelli to Blake, to Delacroix to
Rodin.
Yeah, there's so many. I'm going to miss a few, and then of course to the modern age, film adaptations as well.
Yes, Eliot.
And then we also have, we've learned how cartography played a pivotal role in, in infusing the imagination of the artists, and the kind of, the way in which they gave artistic as well as discursive representation of their travels. And whether it's internal or inner travel, or it's external travel. And then also how in all these explorations, mediation, artistic mediation plays a huge role, right from the primary artists or the writers till the ones who then took up so the mediation, it plays a huge role, and how there's also the possibility and the with the license, of course, there is the colonial and ethnocentric and Eurocentric representational practice that comes into play in these writings and in the illustrations of the same.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. And I'd now like the audience to ask their questions. You can put it up in the chat box, or you can ask it. You ask your questions yourself.
If I may, I don't even know what to say. I don't think I'm qualified enough to ask a question. I think, sir, it's just been so awesome, and I've learned so much. I really don't have a question, and it's just been a learning process throughout. And I, in fact, have a suggestion for you, sir. Apart from writing, you should put this. There should be a book coming out of this. Really.
Yeah, that is true. Whether I'll write it, I don't know. But there are a lot of leads, a lot of things to be developed.
Both. Sir, you totally must. You've taken us through, the origins to how it plays out in the modern day today, and right till Da Vinci Code. So this incredible linkages, and you have all the paintings that you've shared with us. So I really think, sir, this needs to go in the form of a book. You're depriving a lot of people from a lot of knowledge if you don't compile your works.
Well, I did compile your last paper, remember? The
yes,
Thoru paper, it has come out.
Yes, you did. So you totally must, sir. So I really don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Nandini.
It's been a huge learning experience.
Thank you, Nandini and Atika. And it's a pleasure. It's an honor to come and speak here. Because of the interest you take, and it's always energizes me, to say something which is worthwhile, as far as I think. And I hope you also will get something out of it. People can contact me later also if they want. If anyone wants to.
Like everybody is dumbstruck. Everybody is.
No, I'm sure there are a lot of questions, but they'll ask at
there's
some
so
other
much
time.
to seep in. There's so much for them to process that I guess.
So they're at liberty to ask me later on. You can give them my contact details, And if anybody wants to clarify anything or ask anything, I'll be most glad to, clarify. So please do that. And I look forward to being with you people, my own presence over there sometime in the college, because through this virtual thing is fine. One can reach out quite a lot, but somehow I miss that, direct confrontation, direct encounter. That is much more inspiring, right? And organic. So anyway, I thank all of you. I think if there's no question, it's fine. I will wait for the questions later on.
So some comments are coming in, and I'm sure even if we don't have questions, faculty members, I'm sure you would like to talk to sir. Just say how much you appreciated his work.
You can. Anyone can talk. Anyone can say anything. Would they like to discuss? I mean, say anything or make a comment. Right.
There is a comment already.
Yeah, there are comments coming in.
You can
appreciating the session.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask what you intended to say about Islam vis-a-vis this talk, because it is quite well known that.
Well, I have kept it aside, Atika. I've kept the book aside. I have not gone through it, but I intend doing it. This is the book, all right?
Okay.
Can you see it?
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a person from
this is a
person from Spain. All right, here is Miguel Asin. All right, from Spain.
Okay.
He is supposed to be a great scholar. All right, and he has related to this the inspiration of Dante in going to heaven. He has related it to Islamic edicts. All right, the thinking.
Islamic what? I didn't get you. Islamic thinking. Of course, there is a lot of similarity between these religions because of their, they all believe in one Godhead. But the fact that, but there's also this very contestational relationship between the two as well. We have the crusades going on.
Exactly.
And so, which is probably one of the reasons why Dante put the prophet in one of the circles of hell. So it does talk about
quite
the
a
kind
few,
of anxiety that Christianity had.
Absolutely, quite a few popes are put in hell. All right, because they are also implicated in certain decisions, like Dante himself. All right, he's the protagonist. He himself is charged with a lot of sins. All right, and he has to overcome them. He has to confess them. He has to overcome them. All right, and then only can he
proceed further.
The goal, right? And that goal is something which cannot be. He asks for. It reminds me of the epics. Where like Homer or like Virgil, where the poet invokes the muse. To inspire him. All right, and to speak out the truth. Okay, like Homer does or like Virgil does. In the Aeneid, and that's what happens. Where at the end of the Divine Comedy, Dante invokes the God he believes in. All right, to invest him with the power to speak truth in poetry. All right, and that is what is the substance of his poetry. All right, and we see the same kind of logic or philosophy in T.S. Eliot's later poetry. All right, that is in Ash Wednesday and in the Hollow Men and so on. Okay, in the Four Quartets and even in the Murder in the Cathedral, we see all the late poems and the plays of T.S. Eliot moving in the same direction. All right, as Dante does in the Divine Comedy. Right? So it's a very interesting thing to see that.
So this concept of divine retribution and this concept of sainthood, because when you talk about Murder in the Cathedral, remember the fourth sin was where he's accused, where Beckett is accused of wanting sainthood for himself.
To be a martyr.
So to become a martyr. And I thought that was very interesting and
very interesting.
And so
yes, he has to overcome that fourth tempter.
Hubris,
that fourth tempter is very essential. The first three are normal tempters. All right, the fourth tempter is the one who has to be overcome most. All right, and it is very interesting the way all the four tempters also become the four knights. All right, in part 2 of Murder. All right, that there is a very thin line between temptation as an external objective reality and temptation as within. All right,
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah. So it is something that is vindicated or justified in a language that you understand. All right, in a language that you have also created for your own justification, for your own survival. So there's a very thin line between false redemption and real redemption. All right, that which is done in a technical manner or in a formal manner. All right, including the activities of the church, which often is seen that way, where the church is externally trying to absolve sinners. All right, but the sinner himself or herself has to absolve in her own capacity. All right, in her own mind and soul. All right, so that thing is what you see excruciatingly treated in Divine Comedy. All right,
Yeah.
to the different
So
stages.
then to really stretch this, because recently I was reading Michael Madhusudan Dutt, and I was
Yeah.
reading this recreation
Yeah, yeah.
by Professor Lal, and there's this
Yeah,
play
yeah.
that they've created, and reading his old letters and stuff. So I see a lot of this again, this the internal conflict that he has. Of course,
Yeah.
it's about the language, but also the religion.
The religion.
Where does he fit in within the society? Does he fit in at all?
Yeah.
And then the temptations. I mean, he doesn't call them temptation, but this
Yeah,
desire to be rich and famous, and then whether
Yeah.
to do it, whether not to do it, whether to stick with the vocation, whether not. So I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm stretching it maybe, but because
No.
that's my
That's
current reading.
absolutely right. Absolutely right. And Ezra Pound also, as you know, in relation
Yes,
to T.S. Eliot, all right,
sir.
he also goes into the same dimension of relating Greco-Roman with modern, and Christian values. All right, and referring often to these ancient texts, growing through modern texts. So this is what T.S. Eliot does in a much more religious manner. All right, in his poetry, we see that happening. And
Yes,
Eliot has written a whole book on Dante. All right,
yes.
and also Dante in relation to the Christian concepts of that time, and how Virgil, the guide that he takes, all right, is also a kind of, within quotes, a Christian prophet. All right, even though he's born before Christianity started. All right, he sort of anticipates many things Christian. Okay, and that gives him, that attributes to him, to Virgil, a very complex, complicated figure. Okay, and that's the kind of figure that Dante chooses to guide him in his travels. Not a Christian soul, all right, but a classical, pre-Christian, all right, guide. Okay, whereas Homer has no problem in the Odyssey, where you see Homer taking Odysseus taking his own guide, all right, the spirit of Tiresias, all right, who actually speaks to him in Hades, all right. So it is there's no conflict of religion or conflict of belief, okay. But in Dante's Divine Comedy, we see two stages coming together, all right, two dimensions coming together, and this is exactly what later on Shakespeare will deal with and Milton will deal with, all right, in their own ways, okay, in their own poetry
Yes.
and their own drama, okay. As I gave the reference to Antony and Cleopatra, all right, we see the connection between Paolo and Francesca, all right, and Antony and Cleopatra, where love also acquires a value, in its own way, but it is contextualized, all right, in a particular evolution of belief, all right. It is contextualized, and that makes it more human, all right. That makes it much more modern, all right, much more serious, all right, much more a part of our literary experience, okay. I mean, that in itself is what we call, Shakespeare, Elizabethan time, we call of the, the early moderns, all right. So it is a modernity which was started by, I mean, earlier by Dante himself, all right, and even we can go back to Homer and Virgil also, all right. The so-called modernity, it can move right up to Homer.
So I had a question. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir.
Who's this?
Congratulations first on the paper, publishing the Turo paper.
Yes, Nisha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Nisha.
Yeah. The question is regarding the sir, the entire presentation, like the way you started this history. So there is this. The artists have this. They instinctually sort of pick from religious sort of concepts, and they in a way through their art socialize these concepts. And And like you pointed out that there is an entire, like say for what Eliot writes or Pound writes, or even in the books that we've seen, uh, the Dan Brown sort of trilogy that has
Dan Brown.
their take on religion in a way is, what if one assumes religion to be a sort of static category, would have been seen as sacrilege. So it means somehow the socialization of these artworks, or the kind of popularity that these artworks have had, also in a way inform what religiously would be acceptable, or say in terms
Absolutely,
vis-a-vis personal
absolutely.
rights.
Right, right.
So how do you see that? How do you see the significance of these artworks in terms of, in sort of their influence on these religious sort of discourse of the time?
Yeah, it's very ekphrastic, as I've said earlier. I've used the term ekphrastic. That art and literature, they go hand in hand. All right. And they are, in a way, mediating, okay, in the course of belief, acquiring belief and faith. Okay. And there is no final say. There is no final belief. All right. It is always a gradual process, okay, that is moving forward. Okay. And making it more complex, more serious. I just now gave the example of Greek drama, all right, of Aeschylus and Sophocles. All right, what are they doing? They are, in a way, making the earlier myths and traditions like the Iliad and the Odyssey much more serious. All right, they are complicating and making much more accountable. All right, the texts which were there earlier on. So, as far as religion is concerned, the belief in God or the belief in a creator, all right, and the individual's relationship with the creator, all this is being reinterpreted, recreated at all stages. And one thing we notice is that the individual is supposed to, coming right up to existential literature, all right, the individual is accountable for what he or she is doing, all right, and this has to be realized through whatever religion or whatever philosophy you're following, all right, that the individual is responsible for certain acts, all right, for certain faiths, certain beliefs, and the consequences of those beliefs, all right. And I think right from Homer onwards, and in Dante, and in Chaucer, and in Boccaccio, all these people, all these writers, later on Shakespeare and Milton, and the modern writers, we have this struggle, this conflict to bring about a state of realization and belief, okay, through the painters and the poets and the playwrights who have broached this subject in their own different permutations and combinations. All right. So art plays a very big role, all right, in redefining, in stating, all right, and misstating, all right, misinterpreting, all right, what is going on. Because as I told you about the French artists, all right, in the Book of Travels, all right, where it's wildly off the mark, what is happening, okay, and it is very imaginary, the dog-like features of Andaman Islands and so on, and also the king, Pope Gregory, looks like Santa Claus, all right, with a big white beard and a red cap and so on, looks like Santa Claus, and all the Kublai Khan looks like a French king, all right. So this is all misinterpretation, but we are not interested in that, just like we see in Byzantine art, all right, that we are looking at the semblance, all right, of ideas, all right, the ideas which are based on particular things, because there was no way that Europeans of that time, who had not been to China, who had not been to India, all right, they could conceptualize the people who are there. They did not even know such a place existed, all right, or that the earth was round, all right. Well, Christopher Columbus brought that about, that the earth is round. He's going west, but he wants to go east, all right. That's how Christopher Columbus traveled in the late 15th century, all right, that he's going towards the west, but actually his destination is India, all right. And that's how he found America and called them the Red Indians. Or whoever. So it is through a lot of misdirections that directions are found out, all right. But what is important is the activity, all right, the discourse which takes place, all right, and that is what we are involved with, because we are in a very meek and timid way on the margins, but looking into this huge movement that is going on, okay, without any solid fixed principles, all right. And it is the mind of the artist, the mind of the poet and the creator and the playwright like Shakespeare, who's throwing it all up and recreating it and recomposing it. Have I answered you? Have I answered your question? maybe not fully. You can ask me later on also.
Hi, I have a question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Hello,
Chandni.
sir. First of all, thank you
Hello,
so much
Chandni.
for inviting me. Hello, sir. It was a great talk, like
Thank
very
you, Chandni.
informative.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Yeah. I actually have a question regarding Pisa's influence on the tales because, like, I mean, you mentioned
Who's the influence?
Pisa, so Lucitello Pisa, I think, is the
Acha,
name,
acha,
the
okay,
person
okay,
who,
okay,
yeah.
okay. The Pisa, yeah.
Because towards how, like at one point you mentioned that how, like, towards the end, Marco Polo disappears from his own tales. And I think many scholars have also noted that Pisa sort of included many incidents from, say, Arthurian legends and like other early romance literature.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could sort of elaborate on that.
How do you want me to elaborate? What do you want me to say?
Like how does Pisa's presence kind of influence?
It's a very interesting kind of a reproduction, right? By Pisa. Pisa was a romance writer, right, of that time. Okay, and so he was sharing the same cell in Genoa, okay, with Marco Polo, okay, in 1298, all right, and Marco Polo obviously had someone to talk to, and he told all his tales, and Pisa brought in many things in his own style, all right, in his own style, and perhaps he also put in many things into the text as well. Now we have the same charge made for Shakespeare as well, don't we? All right, that Shakespeare, many of his things were interpolations, all right, in Shakespeare's plays. Okay, we have that as well. So in that way, Marco Polo's travels was not, first of all, written by himself. Okay, it was written by with Rustichello da Pisa's romance inputs. Okay, his writing style in High French, all right, in High French style, he did that. But the main thing is that a large voice, has been manifested in literature, okay, and has been put across, and with tentative images, with the images that were possible. And as I told you, Marco Polo himself illustrated with his own words many things that he said, all right, in the sense that referring to, very specific ideas like Buddha and Sakyamuni and Devdasis and so on, that, this Rustichello could not have any idea about, all right. There are many things in the book which were fairly exceptional, all right, and exclusive, okay, which he would not have, and it's fairly accurate. Many of these accounts are accurate, all right. It's same regarding the artists also, as I told you, that they were French artists, all right, and they were drawing these illustrations in a very typed way, all right, in a very, in a one kind of sequence, okay, and it sort of fitted in many ways, like they do images in India, the murtis, the clay murtis in the Durga Puja and so on. It's done in the same style. There's a kind of mold by which everything is done. So that's the way it was done. So in some ways, all this is shared. Now you remember that in the 15th, 16th century, early 16th century, we have Cervantes. All right, Cervantes also spending his time in prison. All right, and when he was captured during the war, and writing his Don Quixote when he comes out. But no one mediates in the context of Cervantes. He writes a very comic novel, all right, Don Quixote. Okay, and that acquires a different kind of relevance. But this one is something to do with crossing boundaries, crossing countries, reaching out to a new continent, all right, and that is itself something very special, all right. And I think Rustichello de Pisa plays a part in it, all right. He plays a role in it, and he's acknowledged by Marco, all right. And it is true that such an ancient text, in a sense, almost ancient, all right, the figures who are the protagonists, they somehow disappear, all right. They disappear in the end. And that itself shows that Marco Polo is not writing, all right, that it is not he who is disappearing in his own style, all right. He's disappearing through the virtue of another person's account, all right.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That made a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have something to say, Chandni, more than that?
No, sir. I was just wondering about Pisa because generally that's what happens when, like, when the story is being told by someone else. The person ends up inventing a lot of details, etc. So I was just wondering how.
Yeah, but Chandni, Shakespeare wrote all his plays almost by taking
Yeah.
Hollingshed and so on. All right. So it is a different version of an older story. Dr. Faustus is from the Faust book. All right, Marlowe's. All right. So in literature, that does happen. All right. But it's a question of the rendering ultimately. We don't even have that, with Marco Polo. All right. We don't have his rendering. All right. We have Rustichello Polo. But the image of Marco Polo still persists. All right. And what he has done. And as I told you, the Catalan Atlas is also something that complements his own narrative. All right.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I would love to hear any more comments. All right, any other comments if they are there. I'm interested in following up Chandni on Rustichello di Pisa. I don't know enough about him. All right, there is very little about him, and you mentioned the Alexander romance, okay, which Marco Polo talks about in the first chapter. All right, and Alexander romance at that time was very popular. All right, everyone knew about it. All right, so there's nothing about. I mean, it's no interpretation. All right, by Rustichello. It is mentioned by in one or two lines. All right, the Alexander romance. Okay, and we have a different kind of a trajectory. All right, that along with Marco Polo's travels to China as a kind of subservient, all right, kind of person in the Kublai Khan's court, we have an imperial movement of Alexander, all right, towards the east. All right, it is a very imperial kind of a movement and something which has again got homogenized into literature, all right, and art. All right, so there are many paintings, miniature paintings about the Alexander romance as well. You can look it up in the internet. There are it's a contemporary reference point. All right, the Alexander romance, okay, which has been referred to by John Mandeville and many others.
Yeah, actually, sir, I'm so sorry. I think my voice was not clear. I have a little bit of cold. I didn't mention Alexander romance. I said Arthurian legends. I think Arthur's legends.
Arthurian legend. Oh,
yes, sir.
Oh, no, it was Alexander romance.
All right.
That was a particular epic, all right, which was written at that time, all right. And Marco Polo mentions it in chapter 1, all right, the Arthurian, the Alexander romance. So I just mentioned it in my paper because it complements or supplements, the kind of travel literature that Marco Polo wrote. All right, it's a different side, and it does not move into Christian literature necessarily. All right, it is written by maybe Christian writers, all right, and artists, but it is not fundamentally that. So it has, Marco Polo's book is also very secular in many ways, all right, even though he has a lot of Christian references and other religious references.
All right. Thank you so much, sir.
We don't have any more questions. Yes, I think we've had you speaking for 2 hours already.
My God.
And it's been a great treat. No, I'm saying you must be quite exhausted, after this session.
No, I'm not.
And it's been a great pleasure to have you. And it was very refreshing, this the topic, and how we've learned how Il Milioni and Divine Comedy, the richness of these texts and how they have lived on all these centuries. And so thank you very much, and thanks to Vikram for
thank you, Vikram, very much.
Taking care of the slides, and thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you once again, Professor Majumdar, to have you again.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, the principal,
for a talk on your book.
The whole English department.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm not able.
The entire English department.
Let me see if I can.
And all my friends. Thanks, everyone. I know many of my friends.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.